Tell me when I should start. I'm
We
not
are
sure.
we are live. Well, let's give it a few minutes. Let's wait for people to trickle in. We have folks coming in from the waiting room, and let's give it a few more minutes. And Colton, where are you? You're based out of the San Francisco Bay Area, right?
Yeah, I'm in Santa Clara, the South Bay.
Okay, wonderful,
How
wonderful.
about you?
Uh Currently physically in another location, but typically in Palo Alto. So yeah,
Uh,
great. But nice to be here with everybody today. And yeah, I'm excited to do this Ask Me Anything format.
yeah,
Should be good.
it should be fun. Thanks
Yeah.
for joining.
Yeah, you're welcome. Okay, well, I think we have a decent amount of folks here. So why don't we get started, Colton? I'll turn it over to you.
Awesome. So thanks again, everyone, for joining the Founder and Startup Immigration AMA with Sophie Alcorn. I'll tell you a little bit more about Founder Social Club and then hand it over to her. So as you can see on the screen, there's a few group or QR codes to join. Um, it's a WhatsApp group to stay up to date with events for Founder Social Club and connect with other members. Website, foundersocialclub.com, where you can create your profile and get access to deals. And then lastly, my Calendly link, where we can schedule a time one-on-one to get to know each other and see how I can help you out. So a little bit more about me. I was in the hospitality field a few years. I transitioned into supply chain, got my master's in supply chain from Purdue. The past few years, I was with Walmart e-commerce in operations, helped them launch 2 automated fulfillment centers. Then moved to the South Bay area a few months ago. I'm currently looking for a technical co-founder for my startup Kind Labs. I'm growing Founder Social Club community, and then I also have a podcast, Change with Colton, where I interview founders about overcoming obstacles and gaining confidence. So what is Founder Social Club? It's a community for founders to connect, learn, and grow together. I want the members to embody 5 key values, which would be respect, accountability, collaboration, honesty, and helping others. When I moved to the South Bay, I realized there's a loneliness in the founder's journey, and I want to help eliminate that for everyone and create this community for you. I also want to help founders connect with mentors to help them fast forward progress, whether it be startup advisors, VCs, or exited founders, or just people on the same journey as you. I'll also have in-person events in the South Bay and San Francisco area. In the past, I've had 2 founders walks in San Jose, and then I'm planning on collaborating with Plug and Play in the future in Sunnyvale, and then looking for a space in San Francisco. And then for those of you that are not in the Bay Area, I want to connect people to you from Silicon Valley and host events similar to this. And then again, the WhatsApp community, that's the link to join. We'd love to have you there. And then, as I discussed earlier, there's over 150 deals to run your startup there, as you can see on the right-hand side. Airtable, Intercom, Slack, you can get a lot of savings. And then currently we have about 37 members. My current plan is to have it be free for the first 50, and then there will be a monthly and annual fee. So please invite anyone else that you think would benefit from the community. And then I do have another event next Friday, July 12th, where I'll be speaking with Jason Jacobson. He's the founder and managing partner of Propellant Ventures. He's based out of Chicago. He's also the managing director of Founder Institute. He'll be discussing crafting a pitch deck, business development strategies, strategic planning, and building business relationships. And that's the RSVP link there. I also will send it out after this session today. And then if you have any ideas on how to make the community more valuable, just let me know. Now I'll hand it off to Sophie. She's the founder and CEO of Alcorn Immigration Law. She's a best-selling author of Ask Sophie, and it's a pleasure to have you here today.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Colton. I really appreciate it. It's wonderful to be here with you. And let me get my screen share happening. All right. Okay. So, yeah, I'm super excited to do this founder visas and green cards. Ask me anything today. I know we have a bunch of people with questions, and so I'm excited to take those throughout. I do have a short presentation prepared just to be able to give, some guidelines for what we chat about. But I would love to take your questions, and we do have the Q&A panel, which is where I will primarily be taking questions. So if you know you already have a very specific question, please let me know now in the Q&A panel, and I will be happy to answer those. But Rebecca, from a technical perspective, I do see the chat window, but I am not able to activate the Q&A panel. So I don't know if we have different webinar settings for this than compared to what we're used to. But maybe it's on me. Hang on one second. I just going to stop sharing my screen, and I'm going to try this one more time. Oh, there we go. Now I have access to the Q&A panel.
My apologies, Sophie. I've changed you to host.
Oh, thank you so much. Okay, here we go again. So yes, I will. I don't know what's happening. For whatever reason, I can't get my Zoom to show my slide deck and my Q&A panel in the same window. So let's use the chat window, everybody. So what that means today is, first of all, Rebecca, can you please confirm that everybody has access to the chat window? And we just want to make sure that people can post their questions either directly to the panelists or publicly, but folks should recall that this is a public forum and whatever you talk about is not confidential or privileged. And you don't want to be giving out you don't want to be giving out personal identifying information. You want to make sure you remain anonymous. So I'll be happy to field questions, and there should be a variety of ways to get them to me. Apologies for not being able to access the Q&A panel, but I think we can do it through the webinar chat, which I do have access to. So I'll dive right in. And then as I begin to see those questions, I am happy to focus on them. And I'll also tailor my presentation to the amount of time that we have, but prioritizing your questions, because that's really why I'm here. And I'm grateful, Colton, to you for bringing me here to answer everybody's founder immigration questions. By way of background, I'm the founder of Alcorn Immigration Law and the host of the Sophie Alcorn podcast. I'm a certified specialist in immigration and nationality law by the State Bar of California, Board of Legal Specialization. I wrote Ask Sophie, the Founder's Guide to Visas and Green Cards, which is a bestseller. Thank you for mentioning that, Colton. Personally, I meditate, I'm a mom, and I believe that the world should be a place where every child has the opportunity to live their dreams. And what does that mean? It means we can go to where we want and we can do what we want. And when each human is able to self-actualize like that and be in their flow state, I think the world is going to be a way happier, more peaceful, more abundant place with, beautiful rivers and streams and oceans and people flying to outer space and all sorts of wonderful things. So my contribution to trying to help make that future a reality is helping people get unstuck from immigration and be able to navigate it, navigate through it clearly. And you can reach out to me and my team at any time. We are accepting cases both for startups and for individuals, including aspiring founders, and always happy to help. And you have my email here, Sophie@alcorn.law, and I also have my law firm intake and questionnaire information at the end. Okay, so my lawyer disclaimers, because I am a lawyer, so there's always fine print with lawyers. This is an educational service. This is not legal advice. I am not telling you specifically what to do with your life. I am providing generic, freely available information. And if you need legal advice for your personal situation, definitely book a private one-on-one consultation with an attorney, us at my law firm, somebody else, whatever. But when you do that, then what you talk about will be confidential and privileged, and they can actually give you specific guidance for what to do. And if you do want to get in touch with us at Alcorn, when you see the QR code in the bottom right of the slides, that is where you can contact us. Okay, so as I get started, I do just want to confirm with Rebecca, and you're welcome to come off of mute. But I just want to check if everybody can use the chat window since I'm not able to access the Q&A panel.
I'm working on that, Sophie. The
Okay.
Q&A panel should be visible for you.
I just keep clicking on it and the window. I have a notification that it has a message, but whenever I click on it, no window pops up. So I think it's broken, but as long as everybody can use the chat window, that should solve it for us today.
I think
I'm
so. I'm struggling to convert that.
I'm able to access the Q&A panel as well.
I just can't read it. That's the problem. I need to be
Okay.
able to read everybody's questions, and I can't.
Sophie, I can actually drop those into chat directly to you.
Oh, perfect. That works. Okay, everybody, we're in business. Use the Q&A panel to ask your questions. And be sure to note that there's a way to tag yourself as an anonymous attendee so that your name doesn't show up publicly when you put the question in there. But oh, yay, I see the first question came in, and it was, I want to know about the O1 visa. Who is eligible and what is the process? I'm absolutely going to cover that, so you are in the right place. So let's get to it. This is part of my amazing team at Alcorn Immigration Law. We just hired a couple of additional attorneys who are amazing, and we are hiring some more paralegals, which is also very exciting. So more team members coming soon, but we're a remote distributed team of legal professionals around the United States we've helped, over 4,000 people from all around the world get visas and green cards to live and work legally in the United States. And everybody who, works with me is super passionate. Like my mom's from Germany, other folks are immigrants themselves. People on the team are married to immigrants. We hired somebody recently who served in the military abroad. So everybody's really passionate about this for one reason or another. And so for us, helping you is personal. Okay, so now we have a poll that we're going to be launching. And I think I can get this started now. Great. So here's our poll for everybody. It has 6 questions, and this will help me learn more about you, and you can get a preview of all of the questions from the slide. But I would love to know if any of you are here on a B1, B2 visitor visa, if you're here on a work visa, do you want to personally immigrate in the future? Maybe you're not even in the US right now. Do you want to be a startup founder one day? Are you already a startup founder? Are you looking to help your team members with immigration in your startups? If you can just take a quick minute to answer these poll questions, it'll really help me guide the webinar to know what to focus on. So really, really appreciate everybody taking some time there. And I do see that another question came in. And this is from the perspective of a student on an F1 visa who wants to start a company after completing their master's degree. What type of visa do they need? What is the best way? They don't need a green card. It's only about acting as a business person in the USA. And I do see that the chat is disabled, and I think we figured out a workaround now. So any questions you have, you're welcome to put into the Q&A panel. And I will be receiving those. So that will work. All right. Several people have completed the poll. We're at 58%. Now we're at 66%. Wonderful. All right. I'm going to be closing down the poll in just a minute, but I did note that we have another question from a student who's planning to work at a startup and then to apply for an O1. So that's a good pathway that can definitely work. I talk to students, or I talk to people who've been like a founding engineer at a startup after having been a master's student or an undergrad here, and they're in pretty good shape to apply for an O1 after that experience if you do certain things. So thank you so much for completing the poll. Here are the results. We have several folks here on, oh, no, excuse me. We've got one person here as a visitor. We have several people here on work visas. We have a lot of people who want to immigrate in the future. Almost everybody wants to found a startup, and many of you already have. And you're also interested in hiring team members. So that's great. Thank you so much for sharing that information. And now we can proceed. All right. So now I'm just going to share a little bit about the immigration context to help put this into place, especially if you're like an American startup founder and you want to sponsor a co-founder or a founding engineer or another employee. Just having the basics of this context, I feel, can really, really help folks as they begin to think about navigating this journey. So why? Why do people want to do any of this? Well, for startup founders, it's really about creating something new that's never existed before. And this can be everything from, oh, okay. I want to make sure I'm sharing my slides. So let's redo this. 1 second. I was sharing before, but now am I sharing? Colton, can you see my slides? Okay, great. Okay, we're back in business. Thank you so much. Zoom is acting a little funny today, but so it goes. It's a bad hair day. Okay, great. So why would you want to do any of this? Well, for startup founders, it's really about the creation process. It can be about having, even before you're doing research, I'm meeting more and more founders now who need a sabbatical from life to be able to think clearly, not have to look at their cell phone, not be inundated with like social media messaging or the tasks of their day job or student commitments that they had to do. And even yesterday, I was talking to a woman who's a founding engineer, used to be an international student, and she has VCs knocking on her door saying, hey, we want to fund your next thing, which we know is going to be an AI. And she's like, well, I'm working an 80-hour-a-week job. I have no time to think. I don't know who my co-founder is going to be, and I have no idea what my product would be. So how can I accept your money if I don't know what I would do with it? So there's an even earlier phase, which is the like sabbatical time runway, clearing the mind phase at the beginning of the invention process, where immigration can be crucial as a component of that plan. And from there, people need to research, they need to launch, they need to iterate, they need to try to get initial product fit. If they're outside the US, maybe they have to redo product market fit within the US if they're localizing. So there's all sorts of things at the very beginning of the product creation process at a startup where immigration, peace of mind, and US access and living in the US is critical for the founder. But there's a lot of other reasons that people, navigate all of this, and maybe you're not ready to be a founder yet. So you might be interested in advancing your career or having the professional autonomy to choose your own projects, or maybe you want to work in outer space technology on controlled technologies. And so you need a green card to be able to get through the export control licensing requirements. There could be a lot of reasons why navigating immigration is just great for your professional future. For a more advanced startup, you might need to be here physically to raise subsequent rounds of VC funding. Like if you raise your Series A in London, but now it's time for Series B, the European market might not be able to support that growth and expansion like the US can. So you might need to be here to raise funding, to go to market, and ultimately to hit that unicorn or decacorn status. And then if you're at the stage of life where you're married or you have kids, those things become huge considerations as well, making sure your spouse can do the job they want to do, and making sure that your kids have that peace of mind to be able to go to college and work in the US themselves one day. Yesterday, we got an EB-1A Extraordinary Ability Green Card approved for somebody who's been in the US for over 25 years. 14-year-old son, and his biggest priority was just making sure his son is going to get a green card before he turns 21, and that EB-1A got approved yesterday, and I'm so thrilled for that family. Okay, so what we're going to be talking about in this Ask Me Anything is how you can take charge of all of this. Happy to answer any questions. Going to be talking about most common visa options for startup founders, most common green card pathways for startup founders, how founders can relocate from abroad to the US if you're at the very beginning of all of this, and what you can do for your family and also your team at your startup. So we'll be approaching this from lots of different angles, but similar US business immigration pathways exist to support all of these goals. And just one other really big thing I want to preface this with is you do not have to be Albert Einstein or Melania Trump to be considered extraordinary in the US. You do not need a Nobel Prize. The government doesn't care about the startup journey, so there's certain like basic startup fundamentals that Paul Graham writes about in his essays, or all these YouTube videos from VCs talking about this, or Y Combinator, right? There's tons of information on how to be a successful founder, but most of those milestones that are significant in the industry and from a venture funding perspective, they don't matter to US immigration because they're not part of the legal framework. So like government doesn't care if you have product market fit. They don't care about your valuation. They don't care if you've IPO'd. They don't even care if you have a minimum viable product. So you can navigate a lot of this even as a college dropout or somebody who never went to college. So I just want to make that abundantly clear, because a lot of people have imposter syndrome and then they procrastinate because they're like, well, I'm not good enough. And, you might not have enough evidence yet for whatever category would be best for you. But what we'll also be talking about today is strategies for how you can become qualified so that you can actually live your dreams and build your startup. Okay, so the typical path is somebody comes here on a visa, like a student visa or a work visa or a visitor visa. And then eventually, after they're able to work here, they try to figure out how to get a green card. And then after you've had a green card, which is permanent residence, it's a lifetime status, you get a 10-year card. But after you've had that, usually for 5 years, then you can become a citizen if you want to. For folks in other countries, you could just get a green card from your home country. You do not have to come here first and get a visa. So if you have teenagers and you don't want to move until everybody has a green card, it might take a few years, but you could theoretically get green cards from your home country, never even having been to the United States before. But that being said, most startups are urgent and important, and the technology is evolving rapidly. And so being physically in the US right away is often very critical for people. And so we usually start with a visa. So I'll be sharing the most common visa types for startup founders. And that leads us to our immigration options. Okay, so first of all, I know there's at least one of you here on a visitor visa. So it's really important to understand what these things are and what you can and can't do. people from Europe, Japan, Australia, they can get something called ESTA. It's an online thing. It's good for 2 years. You can come up for to 90 days on a trip. It's really important when you're doing ESTA to tell them, especially if you're going to incorporate or lease an office or negotiate funding, that you need to tell them you're here on a business trip. You don't just want to be like, oh, I'm here for my friend's wedding, and oops, I magically created a startup, in that trip. Once I had a European guy who came to me who told me his story, which had been that years prior, he had come here on ESTA, claimed it was to visit friends and hang out in New York, and he had incorporated his startup and booked an office and signed the contract. And years later, he was applying for a investor visa based on his 200,000 euros that he had invested personally into bootstrapping this startup. And the European consulate asked him for all of his evidence of the business formation, and he provided that. And the consular officer put it together that these events happened when he claimed to have been here on a tourist trip for pleasure. And he told me that I wasn't his lawyer, I didn't represent him, but he told me that story of how his investor visa, after all that time and money, was denied for committing fraud. So if you know you're going to be here on a business trip, it's okay. You're allowed to be here on a business trip. And the other version is the B1, B2 visitor visa. For most countries, folks get 10-year visas in their passport. They can stay up to 6 months at a time. You can change or extend your status on a trip. With ESTA, you can't. You have to depart. But whether you're coming as a waiver for business, WB on ESTA, or a B1 business trip with your 10-year visitor visa, you are allowed to visit, travel, conduct research, do user interviews, pitch, negotiate personal contracts on behalf of the business, like investment with VCs, form the business, raise money, create a bank account. What you're not supposed to be doing is working. And what is working? Well, working in immigration is either, don't get a paycheck in the US. Also, it's okay to be a founder or a business owner on social media, but I wouldn't put that you're a CEO of a US company until you have work authorization if you're an immigrant, because a functional title like a CEO can be considered a job. And in immigration law, the definition of work really has to do with the possibility of future pay for services. And so really stick to what a business owner would do, but not what a business worker would do on your trip, and you should be good. Somebody asks, on a B1, B2 visa, after 6 months of stay in the US, after how much time can we come back and stay in the US for another 6 months? There is no immigration rule. There may be tax consequences of spending roughly more than half of the year in the US, where you might have to pay US taxes. So that's not an immigration question. That's a global mobility tax question that you should also investigate. But I think that it's sort of like a rolling 6 months, more time outside than inside is kind of my rule of thumb that I've invented that seems to work. So, if you're here for 2 months, be gone for 3 months, and then you can come back and have a return ticket. Or if you're here for 6 months, it'd probably be safer to be gone for 6 or 7 months before coming back. If you really need to spend months 7 and 8 in the US, don't go to Canada or Mexico for 2 days and attempt to come back. Maybe we should talk about seeking an extension of status. That might be a better use of your time and less risky. Another question is, if someone has changed from an H-1B to a B-1, B-2 and now wants to switch to another visa type so they can stay and work on their startup, what is the best option? Well, that is the perfect segue into our other work visa types. So the first one will not work for people from China or India, but it's a tool that's good to know for people from most European countries, several countries in Africa, Latin America, not Brazil, but Mexico has this treaty. Several countries do. So if you want to bootstrap your company and you already have traction and you don't want investors, and you're from a country that has an E1 or an E2 treaty of trade or investment with the US, definitely consider these visas. They cannot be great for people from India and China or people who want to raise substantial amounts of capital, diluting the ownership of the company by citizens from their country to less than 50%. So if you are German and your co-founder is American and you want to do 50-50 on the startup and you guys, have raised 250K and you want to get an E2 investor visa, essential employee, CEO visa, but then you guys raise your Series seed and it's a priced round and suddenly all your safe notes convert and your equity dilutes on the cap table. And now the German percentage of ownership in the company is down to like 32% of the company is German owned. That would invalidate your visa. So probably in that situation, better to look at an O1. But I just mentioned this because with AI, more and more founders are solo founders and bootstrapping, and it could be worth looking into one of these visas if you're in that situation. Now, another type of visa, these would be for our travelers and our folks from other countries who already have startups in their home country and they want to expand to the US. So if you were in India and you just incorporated on Stripe Atlas and now you have a Delaware C Corp and you didn't set up anything in India, this isn't going to work for you. You have to have like a limited liability company, for example, or a corporation in your home country. And then that has to have some sort of close relationship with similar ownership and control of the US company. And then you have somebody working abroad for a year and then they transfer to the US. So if you think about like Google, right, has offices all around the world. I guess Alphabet would be the parent company, and somewhere in that organizational structure, there's like Google Switzerland, which is some sort of entity. So basically, Google or Alphabet owns that Swiss thing, and whoever works there for a year could theoretically transfer to the US. The same thing can work for startups. You can be early stage, but you probably want to have like 5 to 10 employees in your home country who are going to stay there while you travel to the US for market expansion, sales, figure out product market channel fit in the US, raise funding. For an L1 to work, you want to have team members back home, but you can be coming to the US to set up your new office for the first time. Okay, so another very common visa, I'm trying to get everything out of the way before we talk about O1s because O1s are the most interesting thing for most people, but having access to the rest of this information can also be very helpful. So the H-1B. So many of you guys are already on H-1B on work visas working for US companies in the United States, and you want to now go create your own startup. So companies can sponsor workers for H-1B transfers. So how do H-1B transfers work? Well, you need a company, you need a job offer, and you need a candidate. And the cool innovation in, not innovation, the interesting developments in H-1B law that USCIS has made clear over the last couple of years, but especially within the last year or so with respect to startup founders, is that it is actually possible not only for an early stage startup to get an H-1B approved for their first employee, we've been doing that for years, but what we've been able to do multiple times within the last year is get H-1B transfers approved for the startup founders themselves. So if you're on an H-1B working for another tech company and you want to quit and you want to go start your own company, you can now incorporate the company, loan money to it, or raise funding for it. And then the new company can do your H-1B transfer. So you can quit your day job and you can go be an employee at your startup. The company needs money. It has to have the ability to pay you the prevailing wage. So you're going to be spending money on payroll taxes and other overhead that if there weren't a prevailing wage requirement, you wouldn't have to pay. But That requirement does exist, so you have to comply with it. But this can be really great for somebody who has access to maybe $100,000 of capital to do that initial seeding of the business. Could be less. We've gotten companies with way less money approved. And you don't need any other employees. And now you don't even need any co-founders. So the only reason why people wouldn't choose that, let's say you're qualified for both an H-1B transfer and an O-1. Reasons to do the H-1B are if you are not so famous yet that your O-1 is really strong, and we'll talk more about what that means. It's not actually that high of a standard. If you're married and your spouse is on an H-4 with a work permit and they are depending on you to maintain your H-1B status, then you wouldn't necessarily want to get out of it because you want your spouse to be able to keep their job while you do your startup. So in that situation, you would want to stick with the H-1B transfer. But I guess another thing would be if you don't have access to pre-seed funding yet, then there are less monetary requirements with an O-1 overall than there are with an H-1B. So that could be another factor that pushes you towards an O-1. So that answers the question. If you have an H-1B, can you transfer it to your startup? So yeah, absolutely. And what that looks like depends a lot on, is this a startup or another type of business? Are you doing a Delaware C corporation or a California LLC? Where do you live? Where do you work? Is there going to be an office? Do you have co-founders? Where's the money going to come from? When do you need to travel? But if we take all of those factors and put them together, we can make a plan for you for an H-1B transfer. There's also cap exempt H-1Bs, and these are very expensive, but they exist. So if you never got selected in the H-1B lottery and you can't get an O-1 and none of the other visas work for you, but you have a lot of cash sitting around, if you get 2 H-1Bs, you don't have to go through the lottery. If the first H-1B would be a part-time H-1B through a cap-exempt institution, and there's all sorts of programs bubbling up that you can access that we've used successfully. I just got a YC founder in on this in the rush case over the last 4.5 weeks because their batch is starting in a few days. But essentially, for most people, the way they do it is H-1B number 1 is to work at a university or a nonprofit affiliated with the university, mentoring U.S. college students in project-based learning STEM projects for 5 hours a week. And then once you have that in place, H-1B number 2 is for your startup to do your employment there. So we can get very creative, but since this involves 2 H-1Bs at the same time, 2 sets of government filing fees, 2 sets of premium processing, plus administrative fees to whatever program is managing this for you, it's more of a financial investment than some of the other visa types. Okay, so now we got so many questions about O-1. So now we're going to go to O-1, and then I'm happy to answer other questions like comparing and contrasting H-1B and O-1, for example, at the end. But I do want to cover the O-1, and then I want to cover self-petitioning green cards in the last section here before we open it up to more questions. So we'll go ahead and do that. Oh, I can take one more H-1B question here real quick. For the H-1B transfer, if the company is just newly set up the same month, could these get rejected because the company is too new? I've never had that happen. And I started this law firm almost 9 years ago. And the one situation we had was the guy only had $6,724 in his company bank account, but he had letters of intent from customers. So when we got an RFE about hey, how are you going to pay these engineers? We were able to say, well, here's the business plan and here's all these letters of intent. And we have enough capital lined up through XYZ to be able to pay their 3-month salary. And then from there, they're going to launch the MVP. And then from there, the letters of intent can convert and they can start getting payments on those. And that H-1B got approved. It got approved for 1 year, and then we got a 3-year extension. But I have never seen a rejection or a denial simply for being too new of a company. Once we got an RFE from like a top VC backed company where they got $10 million of investment, and we were doing the H-1B for employee number one, who was the founder, and it was the first business activity of the startup. This was like 2.5 years ago when interest rates were still low and the funding environment was very different. But we're like, no, we swear to God, it's a real company. These are top VCs. The $10 million is legit. It's fine. That ended up getting approved for 3 years. What's the lowest amount that might qualify you to get a transfer on an H-1B? Well, if you think about it, we're asking for 3 years, and we're saying that the company has the ability to pay the person the prevailing wage for 3 years. So ideally, we would like to be able to show that there's either enough runway or revenue to be able to fund this person's prevailing wage for the term of the H-1B or the number of hours they're working. So an H-1B doesn't have to be full-time. It can be part-time. The prevailing wage depends on the job code and the metropolitan statistical area where the person's going to be working. We can change a lot of variables. But as I mentioned, the one guy had $6,000. We've also gotten approved with like $60,000. Having some cash on hand is helpful in case of a request for evidence. But in general, the Biden administration today is in favor of supporting early stage startups, especially in critical and emerging technologies such as artificial intelligence and machine learning. So we get a lot of very early stage people approved. Do people usually choose the O1 instead of the H-1B transfer? We'll talk about that more in the O1 section. And then since H-1B employment can also be part-time, can that be an option? Yes. But if it's your single H-1B, then we also want to make sure you're working enough to be able to pay for your life in America. What if I don't have an H-1B visa and I do a volunteer job at a startup? Does this qualify for a STEM? Does this qualify for an OPT extension for a student? Yeah, a volunteer job related to your major can qualify for the 12-month regular OPT. You want to make sure you get it appropriately in CVIS and on your I-20. Okay, now we're going to go to O1s because I know everybody wants to hear this. So why are O1s so special? O1s are nice because you're like at the top of the food chain after that. And it's way easier and faster to get a green card after that, especially if you were born in India or China. And I do see that there's other H-1B and related questions. So I'll probably come back to those at the end if we don't get them answered in the O1 section. So O1s are great also because there's no prevailing wage. So that means that you can pay yourself very little. We've seen salaries as low as $60,000 a year for early stage startup founders working full time. And O1s are also great because what we've been able to now develop is that people can have multiple streams of income in their field of extraordinary ability. So that means you're not limited to just one job. You could have your startup, you could have 2 startups, you could consult on the side, you could be an advisor in other people's startups and get equity for doing that. So a lot of really great benefits about the O1, but the limitation of the O1 if you're married is your spouse cannot work on an O3. So they need their own independent visa to be able to be work authorized or work permit from a green card process. And they're more convoluted, they're more subjective. And so you'll see that different lawyers and different law firms have different ways of preparing them. And so some people might be familiar with doing it one way. Some people might say, no, you have to do it another way. There's a lot of ways to do them. And it's interpreted very differently. And even doing O1s for startup founders is something that I was kind of at the leading edge of over the last 9 years. And a lot of this got developed because of the need in Silicon Valley for early stage startup founders to be able to legally build their companies. It was one of the only options for a long time. And it was really like trying to figure out how models that had previously worked for professors and researchers or like Hollywood actors, how we could, reinterpret those for startup founders. But they've been very, very successful on the whole. So there's two types. You can do it for like business or science through an O1A, or for like UX UI designers, you could do it through an O1B. You can't self-petition, but you can have self-employment be included. You do need somebody else to sign the O1 for you, but if you don't have another person in your company, don't like go out and just randomly give away all your equity to an American to be your signatory. Like there's way better ways to do it than that now. For example, you can work with an agent who is like a professional agent for O1 actors and musicians in Hollywood, and they'll, do this as a routine matter for a flat fee. Okay, so then you need to show that you are at the top of your very field or subfield in a country or in the world. And you do this by showing 3 of the criteria. And we're going to go through what those criteria are. And another way to show the criteria, if you don't have like awards or certificates, or websites, but we can also do this through letters of recommendation. So we're typically preparing multiple letters of recommendation per case. So here are the categories as I interpret them related to startup founders. Now, there are a lot of other types of evidence that I did not include. Researchers have way different evidence. Movie stars have way different evidence, but this is the O1A extraordinary ability evidence criteria specifically for startup founders. So remember, you just need 3 out of these categories in order to qualify. So for the first one, awards. Okay, well, that could be winning a hackathon, getting VC funding, getting government scientific grants in a home country or in the US. There's a lot of competitions that founders do, pitch competitions, hackathons, lots of things. The next one is membership. Are you a member of organizations that are hard to get into? Basically, we want to show that you have been chosen by experts because you are an expert and therefore they want you to join them. So this could be in a startup accelerator or incubator. It could be in a startup founder group. You could be on a committee of a professional association that requires expertise. You could be an advisor to, or mentor to startups. There's a lot of ways to do this. In terms of publicity, having news about you and your company and your home country can be useful. A lot of people might, have scientific articles if they're in some sort of like core critical and emerging technology. But business publications can work too. Like if people write about you in TechCrunch, that would be gold. But there's a lot of other publications that can work. The government's also interested in whether you have been a judge. So this involves you as an expert deciding who else is an expert. So if you're like the judge of an undergrad hackathon, it's not as compelling as like a citywide hackathon. But there's a variety of hackathons you can look at judging on like DevPost, and there's other types of country-specific founder competitions that you could get involved with. Variety of competitions happening all the time. What you created matters. So like, what's your technology? What are you disrupting? Is this patentable? Is there like a license for it? What is the uniqueness and how does it affect the way that other people are doing things? That just might be your core technology that you've created. What have you written? Do you have, were you like a research scholar, or did you join Forbes Council and write there? Did you have an article on Medium or some other media that went viral? And it really does have to go viral. You can't just use any like Medium article. But there's a lot of publications where experts can write, a lot of professional publications. If you've had a leading or critical role in a distinguished organization, we can use that. So that would be, being the founder of XYZ company, but also the projects that you led in prior companies or the leadership roles you had in outside organizations. All of that matters. And then how much money have you made? And this is related to sort of like an H-1B analysis, but like, did you make more money than other people doing a similar job at a similar level in that geography? So if your wage is low for America, but it was really high for Zimbabwe, like we can use it. And then we also do the math with your cap table and your term sheets, and your safe notes. And if you've had a priced round, we can look at all of that to try to impute some sort of valuation for your startup and therefore your equity, and therefore do you have high remuneration and were you well paid? So you can use an O1 for like any job type, except for lawyers. They don't let us do that, but maybe the business of law, you could do it. But we've helped founders, researchers, engineers, influencers, like TikTok stars, inventors. And like what you do in that job is really going to be different. Like what an engineer inventor does, like in their garage in the middle of the night. I don't know, but it's going to be way different than what a TikTok star does, right? So you're going to have different criteria, and that's totally okay. You can mix and match them in any way, and we can reinterpret the categories for your field. Now, I know there's a bunch of questions, but I am going to get through green cards, and then I'm going to try to answer any remaining questions. So you can marry a US citizen and do the 90-day fiance thing. You can be in the green card lottery, but for our purposes, if you don't want randomness and you don't have $1 million and you don't want to marry somebody, the best way to get a green card is to self-petition a green card through the EB1A Extraordinary Ability category or the EB2 NIW National Interest category. First of all, those allow self-petitioning. Second of all, they're faster than a corporate process because they don't involve perm. And perm is, being stopped at so many companies right now. That's not even an option for you. And now there's premium processing for both, which is great. 15 days for EB1A, 45 days for EB2 NIW. So you have these two great categories. So when do you choose which? Well, the EB1A is the hardest green card pathway, but it's the fastest if you are from any country in the world. Might be like 1.5 years faster than any other category. But if you were born in India or China, it could be decades faster. So basically, if you're from India or China and you're a student and you don't have a priority date yet and you want to be a founder and you want to get a green card, your order of operations is something like start your startup on regular OPT and incorporate your company and try to get an O1 so you don't have to deal with STEM OPT, and try to get a priority date in the other green card category, EB2 NIW, as quickly as possible because it's easier. And then when your priority date is current and when you're O1 qualified, EB1A qualified, you can upgrade from EB2 NIW to EB1A. But having an O1 helps you get an EB1A. If you go straight from H1B to EB1A, it's harder. We do get those approved all the time, like the guy yesterday. But you just, if you can get an O1 first, it'll help. In general, the petition gets adjudicated in 15 days. And when you're at the front of the line, your adjustment of status could take really like 6 to 18 months. We've had it be approved in like 4 months for AI founders, but getting to the front of the line is that crucial piece. If you're not from India or China, you're already at the front of the line. There's no backlog. Now, the other category that's easier, and this used to be the same speed for people born in Europe, for example, but the whole world is backlogged 1.5 years plus now on EB2 NIW. But this essentially is just like, do you have a master's degree or a bachelor's plus 5 years of experience, or do you have exceptional ability, which is even easier than extraordinary ability? Plus, what's your plan to help America? Why is your startup in the national interest? Give me the business plan, give me the numbers. How many jobs are you creating? What technologies are you disrupting? How many lives are you going to save? That's the type of argument we make here, and it's completely different from extraordinary ability, but can be much easier. Okay, so a few things I want to mention. Most immigration lawyers charge for things on flat fees. We do too, including requests for evidence responses. Usually the government filing fees are separate. For the things I've mentioned, the government filing fees are usually $1,000 to $5,000, and the legal fees for the law firm, at least for us, can be anywhere from like $5,000 to $15,000, depending on what it is. And it takes different amount of time to prepare things as well. We do have a prep course, which I will ask Rebecca to put the link for everybody so that you can sign up for my asynchronous online course, Alcorn Academy Extraordinary Ability Prep. We have a discount code too for you, which will be in the chat window. And somebody just messaged me yesterday saying they're taking it and it's super helpful. And people also really appreciate that I do a deep dive on requests for evidence, which helps you plan out your evidence more proactively. I do have a live version of it starting in the end of July or the beginning of August. And so that's going to be 8 1-hour weekly sessions, and you get the asynchronous online course as well. But I just answer your questions about, should you judge this hackathon? Should you publish this article? Should you, try to get into this organization? And so I've run those cohorts twice this year, and they've both been really successful and helped the students a lot. If you think you might have enough evidence, but you're not sure yet, that's where we have Legal Launch. It's a 4-week, $2,500 program. We give you our checklist, you upload your evidence, we do a 3-stage internal review, and then we let you know if we can accept your case. And if we can't, then we give you a personalized checklist to complete your evidence in the next 6 months, and then we'll credit the fee towards your case. And you can reach out to us anytime for a consultation. We have a questionnaire. It has a bunch of check boxes. This helps us identify what you might be qualified for. And then I'll go to the questions, but I also want to share that I have my book, which is available on Amazon and Audible. And it's my voice in the audiobook. I recorded that, so you have access to that as well. But we have a few more minutes, so let me try to get through as many remaining questions as I can. Okay. Okay, if under F1 visa, the founder has an H1B before, but can he or she set up a company under the F1 visa? The sponsor then sponsor his or her own H1B transfer to his or her own company? Yes. Or go with an O1? Yes. Do you have to have a founder who is an American citizen? No. But I would say talk to us before you take those steps, because that can get complicated. Somebody else asked, what if I don't have an H-1B visa and I do a volunteer job at a startup? So does this qualify for OPT extension after the OPT is extended for 1 year already? For STEM OPT, you have to get paid. You can't do free volunteer work. You need to be paid at least minimum wage for at least 20 hours a week, I believe. What's the approval rate for O1s? Ours is like 95, 98%. I don't know for sure, but we qualify people very heavily before we accept any cases. And for everybody, Rebecca will be sending the link to Alcorn Academy and the discount code in the follow-up email she'll be sending along with the recording. So with that, Colton, I'm going to turn it back over to you. I appreciate all the great questions and everybody's active involvement. Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, thanks for coming. I hope like you provided tremendous insights on the different options available to people. And I guess we could end the session here. Thanks again.
Okay, thank you so much. Feel free to keep in touch, everybody. And Colton, best wishes, and looking forward to keeping in touch, and let us know if we can ever be a resource. And thank you so much, everybody.
Awesome.
Bye-bye.
Have a